to order. Welcome to meeting number 119 of the Official Languages Committee of the House of Commons. Welcome to Mr. Bacharach, who is standing in for Ms. Ashton. Welcome to the committee, Mr. Bacharach. I'll make a few comments about being careful. Please speak one at a time to prevent acoustic incidents. We know that the problems come from here. Last week I adjourned with a condition that we would start this meeting exactly where we left off. I'll explain for the public. When we adjourn, we can take up exactly where we left off. It was easier for technical reasons to adjourn and not suspend. And we had left it with Mr. Mark Dalton. Are we starting again? No, we're continuing. Then Mr. Lightbound, Mr. Iacono, Ms. Ashton, or her colleague, Mr. Godin, followed by Mr. Serret. Mr. Dalton, please go ahead. Thank you, and hello, everyone. I know that we would all like to be talking about other things and hearing witnesses on the whole range of education from kindergarten to higher education or post-secondary education. Mario wanted to move a motion, but he said he would wait. But my Liberal colleagues decided to move this motion anyway. And the motion is an admonition. It is a disciplinary motion. The motion states that the committee express its disappointment at the behaviour of Conservative MPs, notably the member for Brantford-Brant, towards Francophone ministers and towards the entirety of the Canadian population that speaks French, an official language of Canada. It stated that all members had the right to speak in one or the other, in whichever of the two official languages it wishes. Then it sets out the importance of English and French, which are both indispensable to Canada's identity. It's quite clear, dear colleagues, that this is much more than just upbraiding a member. This is aimed at a Conservative member. Is that the right word in French? Censure? Disciplining? Censoring? Admonishing? This is admonishing the Conservative Party as a whole, it seems, implying that in our heart of hearts, that is our attitude, an attitude that is anti-Francophone and anti-French. Anti-French, and here is a demonstration of it with the conduct of this member, who apologized. It's being taken as evidence that Conservatives do not appreciate the French identity. Well, not the French identity as such, but French and Quebec as being a part of our nation. And nothing could be further from the truth, Chair. I won't speak of how the colonies were founded although it is an important discussion, and therefore I do have some comments to make on the beginnings of Canada as a nation. When the charter, the original charter was established, when the original agreement was established, Mr. Dalton, I have twice heard the argument that apologies were made in the House of Commons. This has been said twice. If that is the case, you could perhaps state it, because this is the point of this motion. If apologies were made in the House of Commons, it may be time to say exactly when and how, because those would be the facts. Mr. Chairman, it is my right to talk about this motion, which focuses on behavior. The behavior of one member, yes, but I do want to explain how Conservatives, from the outset, from the very beginnings of Canada, have supported both French and English identities in Canada. The very first Prime Minister, John A. Macdonald, with Jacques-Étienne Cartier, with much discussion among politicians of the day, it is those two who drew up the charter enabling us to be a country. So we certainly support this duality. Without that agreement made in 1864, first in Charlottetown and then in Quebec City, without that agreement, we would not have a country today. They understood. Well, he hadn't been elected. He wasn't Prime Minister yet, but he became Prime Minister. John A. Macdonald with Jean-Étienne Cartier wanted to forge a country. At the time, we were a number of colonies, and there were tremendous problems for British colonies. At the time, Quebec was a colony of Great Britain. At the time, there was a civil war in the United States, and there were major concerns that we might be drawn into it or taken over either by the U.S. by force or in some other way, and become part of the United States. So those negotiations, that agreement, was tremendously important. I'll speak more about it, but as a Member of Parliament for British Columbia constituency, I should say Fort Langley was the first capital of British Columbia, which was a colony at the time. That was established because in 1856 there was a fear that the U.S., which had a president who wanted to expand the borders to the north, the U.S. at the time wanted to expand its borders up to the 60th parallel, so we made a tremendous effort to establish our independence from the United States. The agreement was therefore very important to Quebecers, French Canadians. It remained as a British colony because it enabled them to keep speaking French and keep their religion, Catholicism.
And just before the Confederation, there was this pressure. These were small colonies. Jean-Étienne Cartier, who was the leader in Quebec back then, and John A. Macdonald, together, they saw the importance of Quebec being included in the Confederation because it was quite a big population in Quebec. The population of all of the colonies together was about 3.5 million, but Quebec really had a major population concentration, and they were in the centre of all of this. So they knew that Quebec had to be included in this new country of Canada. The main concern for these people who were conservatives was a concern for the people in Quebec to be able to retain the French language and protect their culture and have the freedom to practice their religion. Because in the other colonies, it was predominantly Protestant and English-speaking and a different culture. So this was something that was essential for these men. They saw this. And John A. Macdonald originally wanted to have a stronger, more centralized government. But Quebec and the French speakers wanted more power to run education for themselves. It was very important for them to retain control over educational matters. So what happened? They decided to introduce certain accommodation measures. It was a federal government, but with a strong role given to provinces. These were accommodation measures that were granted to protect the Canadian identity and protect, in particular, the French language and Catholicism. So they took this approach based on a compromise so that there was a federation that was strong, but there was a strong role left to the provinces as well, because there are lots of other types of federation models that exist in the world. For example, Australia, the US, and elsewhere. And I could argue that the provinces have more power compared to other parts of the world where federations exist. So as I've said, that was a concern for these founding fathers, because French speakers, as always, already 150 years ago, they were afraid that their culture and their language would actually be marginalized and swept away in a sea of English. Therefore, it was essential to keep Quebec on board and the French speakers within the nation. It was essential for the national identity, for French speakers to be able to have the freedom to participate not just in Quebec but throughout Canada. And it was back then that they took another decision also. They decided that French speakers could speak in French in Parliament and the English speakers. So since the birth of our country in 1867, this right has existed. Now we talk about a right which dates back to 1867. So the MP really committed an error in expressing himself as he did. It's something that really has an impact on our country and our freedoms from the very beginning back in 1867. This has worked well. Of course, there have been certain problems, as is the case in every country, but we're one of the democratic countries that has lasted the longest in the world. I think there are two others that have lasted longer than us as independent countries, namely the US and Great Britain. As Canadians, as French and English speakers, we have something really important here, and we should be proud of this. We need to be proud of what we have in our parliament. Now, what does this demonstrate? This shows that since then, this accommodation-based approach has set the example for accommodation measures in the world and also has had an influence on multiculturalism because we accommodate the distinct identity of Quebec, and that's a good political basis for embracing diversity right throughout Canada. So that's an important point. I think there's a very strong link showing that Conservatives have been there from the very outset, from the founding of Canada, and we've always considered the English and the French-speaking identities within a united Canada. It's the Conservatives who were there together with the Liberals. Now, I don't have the time. Well, perhaps I have time, but perhaps it's better to allow the Liberal MPs to talk about Wilfrid Laurier. But in any case, there you have it. Chair, I'm thinking of the first Conservative Prime Minister, and I'd like to talk a bit more about another person now, another Prime Minister. I'd like to mention Brian Mulroney, and you might think, how does this actually apply to this motion? Chair, I'm going to explain that. Call to point of order. Point of order, just a moment. I'd just like to try and understand the fact that we're talking about the excuses presented by Mr. Brock to the House of Commons. So I don't understand why Mr. Dalton's talking about censorship against Mr. Brock. I don't know why he's talking about the Confederation. Here we're talking about Mr. Brock and the fact that he's presented his apologies to the House of Commons, and I've heard nothing in the last 50 minutes that talks about that. Well, Mr. Dalton talked about Canadian identity. He was focusing on the Canadian identity, which is part of the motion, and the disappointment of all of the Conservative MPs. There were talks about the fact that there is a disappointment about the behaviour of Conservative MPs in the plural, and I think he was going to add another element with another Prime Minister and then establish a link with the motion. So, of course, I'm going to lend him a listening ear. If he actually remains within the radius of the motion, I'll allow him to continue. Point of order. Sorry, I had overlooked you. Yes, I'm used to that. No, it doesn't happen very often. I won't take it personally. Anyway, I just want to check that for the smooth function of the committee, I raised a point of order and you didn't recognise me. Yes, but as you didn't react further, I thought, OK, we'll go back to Mr. Dalton. Well, Chairman, can we agree on the procedure? My reading of the matter, according to this Bible here, is that when we raise a point of order, the debate is stopped immediately and we deal with the point of order. Is that correct? Because you've applied it with Mr. Seri, but you didn't apply the same procedure with me. So I'd just like to correctly understand how we're going to operate. Yes, you're completely correct that that's our rules of procedure, the House of Commons, that you refer to as our Bible. Now, I want to listen to all of the members with an S, and when they don't insist, sometimes I overlook them. Now, you didn't further insist, unlike other MPs, so I thought that my comments with Mr. Dalton had actually answered your point of order, but you're completely correct. Well, I wanted to just check up on the smooth functioning of the meeting. Undoubtedly, absolutely. Point of order. Yes, Mr. Iacono, please go ahead. my colleague opposite is presenting us with a whole expose on the Canadian identity, and once again, identity. The motion that I have submitted at the end does refer to Canadian identity, but the heart of the motion refers to an event that took place in the House of Commons. The heart of the motion talks about a lack of respect because of action that was undertaken in the House of Commons. Everyone who's speaking here about the Canadian identity and ex-personalities really is not related to the motion. It's not relevant to the motion. The motion refers to an action that took place on the 24th of October. The motion refers to apologies. We're asking for something. We're asking for the MP concerned who showed a lack of respect towards a minister related to the French language. My motion is not talking about prime ministers and lots of different historical personalities here in Canada. No, the motion is very clear. So can we please stick to the facts inherent in the motion? Because I think we're really overshooting the mark here and going far beyond the contents of the motion. Mr. Iacono, I accept your comments. However, we have to look at the motion in its entirety. And Mr. Dalton, since he took the floor, has been saying that he actually supports one of the affirmations contained or request in this motion where we say the committee recognises that French is just as important to Canada's bilingual status as English and that French is indispensable to the Canadian identity. So that is part of the motion. It's part of the overall motion. And I think that Mr. Dalton always brings us back to this point to say that he's in agreement with that point. But it's true that your motion as such in its entirety sweeps far wider than that. But I cannot allow us to have a debate as to whether it's very relevant or slightly relevant to the motion, as long as he keeps coming back to the motion in his arguments and in his discussions. I am not just referring to the Canadian identity here. I'm also talking to the spirit behind this motion. From what I see, it's crystal clear. It's a criticism, because if we read the motion here, it's a criticism aimed at the Conservative Party. That's my reading of this personally. So I'm talking about that when I'm talking about the motion to argue that Conservatives are in favour of the right that was established from the very outset to express oneself in French and in English in the Parliament, and that it was the Conservative Party and the elected Prime Minister, Jean-Étienne Cartier, who came up with this accommodation so that Quebec and French-speaking Canadians could be included in Canada with this type of federalism that has been with us since then and is very much appreciated. Now, it's true that I talked about the beginnings of our country, but I'm jumping over 120 years. And I'm fast-forwarding now to another Prime Minister, Brian Mulroney, a Conservative Prime Minister. And I'm referring to the efforts that he made to accommodate French Canadians. Because, you know, the Charter was signed in 1982, and the Liberals and ourselves were all proud of that accommodation. But there was a large hole. What was that? It's the fact that Quebec didn't sign the Charter.
Prime Minister Brian Mulroney the Charter was signed in 1982, and Brian Mulroney was elected for the first time in 1984. And he, as a Francophone, as someone who spoke French fluently, he's of Irish origin, like me. Francophone Irish, Dalton. He came from Bécomo. And he had a passion, not just a passion, but a vision, a desire for Quebec to come on board and sign the Charter. He spent a great deal of political capital on those efforts. He died last year. He was very successful in a range of areas, on a range of issues. Free trade, for example. Apartheid in South Africa. He was one of the leaders. He was at the forefront of those who made a difference. But he had a difficult battle here because the Conservative Party and he as Prime Minister drafted an agreement, the Lac-Mégantic Accord, the Beach Lake Accord, which had a variety of goals, but one very important thing, one of those goals, was to state in the Charter that Quebec was a distinct society within Canada. That's what he hoped for. Of course, all other provinces had to prove that, and the majority did. The process took 3 years, and he did not manage to get it through. The process had to begin again. And, Mr. Chairman, we're still talking about the importance, the significance of French and Francophones in the Canadian identity, in constitutional law. The point I'm making is that the Conservative Party and Conservative prime ministers were at the forefront of those defending these linguistic freedoms from the very moment Canada was forged to Brian Mulroney. Some time went by since Meech Lake. There was another attempt, the Charlottetown Accord, in 1991, I believe. The Charlottetown Accord went to a referendum vote and was defeated. The result was close, but the agreement was defeated. There were concerns in different parts of Canada. And, that's been a battle. I don't know if I should call it a battle, but we are a very large country, and there are different points of view. And the accord contained compromises, but the compromises did not pass a referendum vote. Brian Mulroney made a tremendous effort to support French. and to bring Quebec into the Constitution. That was Prime Minister Mulroney. I could say more about him, but I do have to move on. I'll move on to the last Conservative Prime Minister, Stephen Harper.
Thank you very much, and my apologies to my colleague for interrupting. I believe that my colleague, Ms. Ashton, may be arriving in the room momentarily, and I wanted her to benefit from the full splendor of Mr. Dalton's history lesson, and I'm wondering if he might begin afresh now that Ms. Ashton is in the room, and just start from the beginning because it was important. And I fear that she hasn't really benefited. I'm not going to be able to recount all the details because I haven't been taking notes. But I will thank the committee for allowing me to sit in. It's been edifying, and I'll wish you all a very good day.
Thank Mr. Bachrach. As a matter of fact, Mrs. Ashton is right here in the room. Have a good day. You're excused.
Well, merci aux députés.
Juste si vous me permettez.
Oui.
Réunion, quelle était la liste des noms qui étaient sur la...
If could just remind us of the names on the list. Could you please repeat that list? Yes, Mr. Dalton, who is speaking now. Mr. Lightbound, who will tell me if he still wishes to speak. Mr. Iacono, Ms. Ashton, Mr. Godin, and Mr. Serré. You're repeating what you said earlier because Ms. Ashton had not been here? Yes, that is correct. Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Mr. Bachrach, for those kind words, who wanted me to repeat all my statements. I won't do that. I won't do that. Take two. I'm not going to do that. He can read the blues. Or watch the film. Or watch the recording, I mean. I'd like to say a few words about Prime Minister Stephen Harper, not about everything he's done, but only about those actions of his which are relevant to the motion. He worked on the place of Francophones in Canada. And this is very specific. I am still speaking to the motion. He was Prime Minister between 2006 and 2015, and he took significant measures to recognize the unique cultural identity of Quebec and to support French linguistic rights across Canada. One of the most significant measures Prime Minister Harper took, and let's remember he was a Conservative Prime Minister, one of his most significant actions regarding Quebec was in 2006, the year he was elected. And that was the first time I ran in 2006. I was running against Peter Julian. He's still here. I went to a different riding. He moved a motion in the House of Commons that the House recognize Quebec as a nation within a united Canada. It was official recognition of the customs, language, and culture of Quebec, which were all distinct to Quebec, while affirming Canadian unity. One moment, Mr. Dalton. Ms. Gladue, point of order.
On the list. Merci.
Merci. It's done. You're on the list. Désolé, Mr. Dalton.
Please go ahead, Mr. Dalton. I know other people are eager to speak. I'm well aware of that. And I won't continue any longer than necessary. I will, at some point, end. My purpose is not just to speak, but to speak of things that are very important. And I believe it's important to put on record, put into Hansard, the significance of French, the indispensable nature of French in Canada, with an emphasis on the Conservative Party in supporting that and on its leaders, because it is the leader who sets the direction of a party. I mentioned Prime Minister John A. Macdonald, Brian Mulroney, and Stephen Harper. I will conclude with the Prime Minister, the person who will be the next Prime Minister, I hope. Prime Minister Harper recognized the importance of Quebec's distinct identity. Brian Mulroney made a tremendous effort for Quebec to be brought into the Constitution. It provided for Quebec to be a distinct society. But what Stephen Harper did was to proclaim Quebec as a distinct society was in fact a nation. And that was very important indeed, even though he came from a region in Ontario and later in life was a member of Parliament for Alberta. He recognized that linguistic duality was fundamental to Canadian identity and made a commitment to guarantee that federal institutions would respect both official languages. He also undertook initiatives to support Francophone communities outside Quebec, including instituting educational or supporting educational program for learning French. This helped Francophones in many provinces like Manitoba, New Brunswick. I would add British Columbia to that list. When I was a teacher at that time, we took students on visits to Quebec, and we received subsidies from the government to do that. So he did a lot to help. He and his vision for French in Canada were excellent. That's what we've seen happening in the past. Mr. Chairman, at this time, I will cede the floor, with your permission, to the next person. Yes, I will bow to your wishes. Thank you, Mr. Dalton. Mr. Lightbound, please go ahead.
Le mien marche, le mien marche. Un problème technique ici en chambre.
A technical problem. My microphone works. Here I am. I will be brief. Inaudible comments. No, it is an honor to be sitting in Mr. Serre's place. I can't stop myself from stating just how much time we're wasting at this committee when we have a very important study on the continuum of education to carry on with. We don't need to go back to ancient times. We know what's happened. Member of Parliament Brock made it very clear that a Francophone minister should not answer his question in French, whereas the minister has French as a mother tongue and has every right to answer in French.
And the MP apologised in the House of Commons. That's what happened. So I'd like to appeal to my colleagues to stop this circus, which we've had in the official languages for the last 3 meetings. It's lasted long enough. With full respect to Mr. Dalton, it's fascinating to hear his history lesson, but we can do that without using the House of Commons resources that we're doing at the moment. Thank you, Mr. Lightbound.
On va devoir suspendre 2 minutes parce que
We'll have to
semble-t-il
suspend for 2 minutes because there seems to be a connection issue with certain cables. So just a quick suspension. let's pick up where we'd left off. It seems that the cables are now plugged in correctly. All of the mics are working around the table. And it was Mr. Iacono who'd asked for the floor. Has Mr. Godin finished? Yes, Mr. Lightbound has finished his intervention. Please go ahead. Chair, first of all, I would like to recognise this morning my colleague, Mr. Dalton, who expressed himself in French. I'm not going to talk to whether it was relevant or not, but the fact that he spoke French, I'm sure that it's a relief for all of us to see that there are Conservative MPs who believe that it's important to express themselves and make the effort to learn French and express themselves in French. And I'm sure that my colleague opposite from the bloc will be very happy to see that there is an Anglophone MP who's making this effort to express himself in French. Now, I do not see this interest nor these efforts being undertaken by the MP Brock. So in order to not waste any more time, let's now put this to a vote. Because Canadians are listening to us, as you know, I brought forward a motion on a particular relevant issue. I think we've heard enough comments, enough filibustering, enough talking against this. So I think it's now time to vote on this so we can then move on to other important matters related to the French language. Thank you, Mr. Iacono. Unfortunately, the rules of procedure of the House of Commons do not allow me to put this to the vote as long as people want to speak on this motion in respect of the rules. Well, then I'll continue with my speech. I've not finished. Yes, we'll listen to you then. A point of order, Chair. Inaudible. Please go ahead, Mr. Godin. Chair, I recognize your point of order. I just want to check something with you. My colleague has finished his speech and has asked for a vote on this. Yes, I in fact, presumed that he had finished his speech, and I said I was unable to do this given the rules, and then he said, I've not finished. I'm going to continue to speak. So I then interpreted that I'm the one who said that. It was my decision. Point of order. I asked for a vote, but you have not proceeded to request a vote. So that means that I am then able to continue with my debate. Point of order. Thank you, Mr. Iacono. Now, Mr. Godin. Chair, just to understand the situation, when we ask for a vote, is that not sending out a signal that we've finished our speech? No, not in this case here. Because when we ask for a vote on a point that's not debatable, then that would be the end of the debate. But here we're debating a motion and the floor is still open to those who are on the speakers list. So I still have a list of people. We've got Mr. Iacono, then Ms. Ashton, then Mr. Godin, then Mr. Seri, Ms. Gladue, and then Mr. Beaulieu and Mr. Généreux, who's generously going to speak to us as well on the motion. So, Mr. Iacono, please continue. Thank you, Chair. So to give you some context, on Thursday, 24th of October, the Conservative MP, Larry Brock, actually swept aside an answer given in French to a question that was put to Minister Duclos in English. And to add even more to this insult, before I continue, I'd like to present my apologies to the Canadians who are listening to us, because we really are wasting time. And so I'm very sorry towards Canadians for this, but I have to continue. So to add insult to injury, MP Brock said that his comment was because his earpiece was not working properly, which did not allow him, therefore, to hear correctly the question. However, the video of the question period session, which cannot lie. 348 from the 24th of October 2024 at 15:03 and 53 seconds has clearly shown to us that MP Brock was not actually wearing his earpiece. Moreover, both Mr. Brock and his caucus continue to ignore the facts of the case, which clearly appear on the video recording of this session 358, and they insist on the fact that Mr. Brock was wearing a faulty earpiece. Now, Chair, since I talked about this last week, I have received several comments from my electorate who have looked this up for themselves. They looked up question period 358, and they're very disgusted to see that an MP has lied in the House of Commons. And it's their words. I am repeating the words expressed by my electorate. I'm saying that I'm transmitting these facts to other Canadians so that other Canadians and my constituents hear that I am reflecting what they have said.
Why, I don't know if they'll answer, why are Conservative members trying to twist the facts? Why? What do they have to gain? On Tuesday, October 29, I put a motion before this committee on the issue. However, Conservative members on the committee have chosen to hobble the work of the committee with the dilatory measures instead of pulling their heads out of the sand, condemning what their colleagues said, and insisted that he apologize in the House of Commons to all Francophones in Canada and to Minister Duclos for his lack of respect. A lack of respect. My colleague, Mr. Beaulieu, is always defending French. This is a lack of respect towards French. Mr. Chairman, I would remind my Conservative colleagues that promoting French starts with respecting it here in Ottawa. They can set aside their long speeches and excellent statements on French because what it is doing is trying to divert from what their colleague did. There are 3 cases I already spoke of last week. The Conservatives' failure to act on October 24th, like their leaders' failure to act, makes them complicit in their colleagues' affront to Francophones, a lack of respect for French. Of course, our colleagues across the table will make excellent speeches saying how well they defend French, but they can't tell their own colleague, Larry Brock, to stand in the House and apologize. We have spent all of last week's committee meeting on the Conservatives filibustering, and they're blaming us. But they're not looking at what they themselves are doing. How much longer will they spend, the Conservatives, will they spend putting their pals' interest ahead of the interests of Canadian Francophones? How much longer are they going to focus on wasting time to divert attention from our request that Member Brock apologize? Mr. Chairman, it is time for the Conservatives to stop speaking from both sides of their mouths. Enough double talk. They need to do what they say they will do. Thank you for sharing the letter by Mr. Brock, the letter sent to the committee to ask the chair of the Official Languages Committee to convey his apologies to the minister. So if I understand correctly, you were sent a letter by a member who failed to show respect in the House, is writing to the chair of the Official Languages Committee so that the chair apologize on his behalf to a third party. That is quite something. Where did they learn that sort of procedure? It must be in the Green Book of Procedure that my colleague was holding up a short time ago. Well, you're holding the book and you know how to use it. Mr. Brock wrote to the committee to ask its chair to convey his apologies to the minister. He believes that the chair of the committee is a passenger pigeon. He thinks that the chair is a carrier pigeon. I'm not going to say what sort of pigeon exactly. The answer is very simple. Mr. Brock can read out his letter in the House of Commons. It will take exactly 1 minute and the matter will be done. And where did I learn about this? The Book of Procedures. I understood it, but my colleague is having a bit of trouble with interpreting some of it. So why encourage Mr. Brock to send you a letter? I don't know who was being creative on the other side and said, Mr. Brock will send a letter, they'll apologize on our behalf, and that will be that. That is a lack of respect towards Canadians, towards French Canadians. Acting through a committee chair who will be the carrier pigeon carrying the message to convey apologies on behalf of Conservative members of Ontario. I am ashamed to see this. Conservative members on this committee are refusing to have their colleague apologize in the House for his lack of respect toward Francophones and his lack of respect for French. Before all else, this is a lack of respect for French. The lack of respect to the minister or others is secondary. The reason we are so insistent on having him apologize in the House is that this is a lack of respect towards Francophones, towards French culture, towards official languages in Canada. Mr. Chairman, this is rooted in Conservative culture. They are treating French Canadians as second-class citizens. Because if that were not the case, Quebec Conservatives would have stood up on the very day the incident occurred and said something. Like Mr. Brock was called into the lobby to say what to do when he got back to the House of Commons. Instead of apologizing properly, all he said was that his remarks were unfortunate and that everyone has the right to speak either of the two official languages in the House. That is not, in my view, an apology. That is not a proper apology or an apology of any kind.
Si ce n'était pas le cas,
had that not been the case, or if this were not the case, since October 24th, the Conservatives would have called their colleague to order, required themselves that he apologize properly in the right place. Yes, he became aware, he wrote to you. There was no doubt a debate on that while carefully consulting the code of the rules of procedure, and it was decided to have him send a letter, to have him write. But apologies need to be in the House of Commons, not in the park, not in the street, not in the lobby, not anywhere but in the House. That is where the apology should be said, not on social media forums, as he did. An apology needs to be in the House of Commons. That is where Mr. Brock should apologize. A proper apology in the House of Commons. The rules of procedure don't state that apologies can take any or every form. What happens in the House of Commons needs to be settled in the House of Commons. Tit for tat.
Assez, c'est assez.
Enough is enough. Wasting this committee's time and wasting Canadians' time for hours and hours to prevent Mr. Brock's apologizing in the House, something that would last less than 1 minute, is unacceptable. My Conservative colleagues, after I finish speaking, will no doubt continue the debate with all kinds of statements and rationales, all to avoid apologizing. They will try to show that what Mr. Brock did in the House of Commons is acceptable and respectful. I don't think it is. It warrants a proper apology in the House of Commons. Mr. Chairman, I would ask you again to put an end to this charade and to go to a vote, because I want to move forward with French. I want more constructive debate. I don't want us to keep focusing on a lack of respect for a member of the House who, in the House, when his own colleagues speak French, do not even put on their earpiece so they can understand what's going on. Point of order, Chair. Please go ahead, Mr. Godin. My colleague has just judged parliamentarians who decide to put their earpiece on or not. We're very far from the topic. When parliamentarians are being accused, he should be careful. There's no call to be judging parliamentarians for their conduct in the House of Commons. We did not adjourn, but he said, in fact, he did wear his earpiece, Mr. Brock, that is, and it was defective. So I think Mr. Iacono is responding to what was said at the last meeting, and the last meeting is, in fact, this meeting, because even though we adjourned, we took up where we left off. Mr. Chairman, I understand what you're saying, and it's quite legitimate, but what Mr. Iacono said a few moments before my point of order was a judgment on people who do not wear earpieces to hear the interpretation or to understand what fellow members are saying in French. I believe it would be a good thing to once again remind our colleagues. I wasn't talking about other colleagues. I was talking about the member in question. He does not wear his earpiece, while others are making speeches in French they're not going to be wearing an earpiece. What I'm saying is that he, Mr. Brock, does not wear his earpiece when Francophone colleagues are speaking. This is very interesting. We have a debate on lack of respect towards French, lack of respect for French. We have a debate on the word or words that were used. We have a debate on the form the apology took and the grounds for that apology, problems with the earpiece. But since I said he wasn't wearing the earpiece, nobody on the other side is actually contradicting me and saying he was wearing it. Mr. Chairman, I ask you once again, for the third time today, to put an end to this debate. I see that my colleague is laughing because he finds all this very amusing, but I don't. I ask that we move to a vote. I will reiterate what I said, Mr. Iacono. It is impossible for me to do that because we have to comply with the rules of procedure. The debate on the motion is continuing. Are you done, Mr. Iacono? I will ask you to put me back on the list, however. Ms. Ashton, go ahead, please.
Bonjour tout le monde.
Thank you, and good day to everyone. I've already shared some of my thoughts at our meeting last week, and I'd like to repeat that on our side, we do hope that we can resolve this situation by hearing a formal apology from Mr. Brock in the House. To apologise for the comment that he made and the response that he shared in the House, which showed a flagrant lack of respect towards Francophone people and the place of French within our Parliament and within our country. I am disappointed that we've entered into a filibuster, which is taking away time from a very important study. I was very happy to support that study because I believe it really deals with the crisis facing the early learning education system and the situation of French in our country. I'm seeing this a crisis on the front lines, not as an educator myself, but as a parent. I can see this, and we've heard from the school that my children attend, and we've heard from other school boards throughout Canada that our schools in French and our daycares in French really need immediate help. There needs to be a substantive partnership formed with the federal government. There's a labour shortage that's really in a crisis situation. There's a lack of employees in early learning centres. There's a lack of teachers to teach in French within the French system and also in the immersion system. That's extremely obvious. In particular, in Western Canada, I would say there's lengthy waiting lists. Parents clearly want to send their children to daycares in French, and parents clearly state that they want to send their children to an immersion school or a school in French if they've the right to do so. But the reality on the ground is that we do not have enough teachers. We don't have enough staff available to be able to teach our children in French and enable us to bring up our children in French. And as we've heard from several witnesses, this really does have an impact on our capacity to educate the upcoming generation in French, thereby contributing, obviously, I think, to the decline in French. This is a clear fact that's emerged in Canada. So as I've said, this is a very important study for me. We've heard from very serious witnesses who've taken the time to leave their classrooms and leave their important work back home to be able to share their advice with us and also share their hopes with us. They're putting their hope in us so that we can do something to help them, to support them, and obviously also to support our children who want to learn French, and parents who want their children to learn French, and the Francophone communities who want to really attack this issue of the decline of French. I'd also like to share that I met with Canadian Parents for French. That's an organization that does remarkable work throughout Canada. I personally benefited from their work in our community, and families of immersion students really owe a great deal to this organization. And they were quite clear. We sent them as witnesses. They were ready to make their statements, and they weren't able to do so because of this filibuster. They've got important recommendations to share with us, and unfortunately, because of what's happening and this wasting of time, we are not able to actually listen to their comments. I think it's quite troubling that as a committee, we're sending out this type of message, namely that we prefer to waste your time on a filibuster instead of resolving the issue in front of us. The fact that an MP in the House of Commons, an Anglophone MP, has made a comment which showed a lack of respect towards a Francophone MP, a Francophone minister, and has shown a lack of respect also towards the usage of French in the House. And of course, it is one of our two official languages here on the Hill. But it's also troubling, I'd say, that we're not hearing a true apology proffered in the House, because of course it's not the first time that this has happened. We've also heard what another Conservative MP came out with, interacting with another minister. So these are not one-off incidents. So this clearly shows, I think, a lack of respect towards French and Francophones in our country. I'd like to add that, of course, the Conservative MPs here in this committee have clearly shown, in particular those who are Anglophone MPs, that they do have an interest in the protection of the French language. We're certainly not calling that into question. I don't think so. But the real point here, and I think it's a crucial issue for an Official Languages Committee, is to ask accountability to be shown by an MP who showed a lack of respect towards French and Francophonie in the House. This highlights a systemic issue. Canadians who are interested in this are observing what's happening. And this question of just putting an apology on social media instead of presenting a true apology in the House of Commons. And as parliamentarians, and not solely as parliamentarians, but as parliamentarians who are interested in this and who have a duty to take this issue of official languages seriously, we have to push for seeing a true apology in the House and send out a clear signal that French is well accepted in its usage on the Hill, and that it's unacceptable to deny the rights of MPs to express themselves in either French or English. We have to clearly state to Canadians that we have to recognise that a mistake has been made. That has to be recognised in the House. And we have to get down to work to truly protect French, which is in a state of decline in our country. So I would like us to put an end to this filibuster and move to a vote and make sure that we'll never hear this again. Because that's the second time that we're seeing a Conservative MP making this type of comment. And we see that Conservatives as a party should be defending French. We have certain reasons that call this commitment into question. When we hear these remarks, I was there during the Harper years. We saw cuts towards Radio-Canada coming from the Harper government, and other cuts were made when it comes to the Court Challenges program, and also cuts towards Francophone organisations. It wasn't a pro-Francophonie government. There was not the right support. There wasn't leadership shown towards Francophone immigration either. And I think Canadians in particular, Francophones, and in particular in Western Canada, Francophones are really concerned about this. Because possibly they're wondering what the Conservative leader would do as Prime Minister if he were elected as PM. So we now need to move to a vote, I believe, and ensure that as a committee we state clearly that we're expecting to hear a true apology, a proper formal apology proffered in the House of Commons. The Francophones of Canada deserve this, as well as other Canadians who are interested in the protection of French in our country. And I hope that we'll be able to move as swiftly as possible to hear this apology. Thank you very much, Madam Ashton. Mr. Gaudin, you're next on the list. Thank you very much. So where should I start? First of all, I'd like to build on the comments just made by my colleague, Madam Ashton, on this question of apologies from my colleague, MP Brock. Now I'll speak aloud. Coming from an MP who took a trip to the Carnaval de Quebec back in 2023 and didn't actually present any apologies on that. Point of order, please. Please go ahead. Mr. Gaudin. Well, if we want to start that type of debate, well, you know, that's not at all the subject of debate today. And I'm very disappointed by this effort that you made. Once again, we see Conservative MPs wanting to play political games instead of talking about the substantial issue at point. I've already assessed that situation. It's a political game. We know that as MPs, we follow the rules. We do what we have to do. I've already talked on this subject, but I'm very disappointed that once again we hear the Conservatives wanting to talk about other things rather than talking about one of their own MPs who has insulted Francophone and the French language by his actions in the House. So I do hope that we can get back to the heart of the matter. To recall the point of order, another point of order. Well, just to come back to what Madam Ashton has said, I don't know exactly what she's referring to, but I see that MP Gaudin is engaging in personal attacks. I know, Mr. Gaudin, I know you're better than that, so please show more discernment when you hear what Pierre Poilievre's office is telling you what to say here. You're worth far more than that. Ms. Lightbound, Mr. Lightbound, Mr. Gaudin. The point of order is very relevant. We're debating a motion here, after all. And the intervention by Madam Ashton was referring to the motion and the fact that there was a lack of time to hear from precious witnesses for the study underway, and that she was suggesting that we have to move on to a vote, as she said, so that we can continue with our study. So her comments were on the motion. Mr. Gaudin, please stick to the debate on the motion. Mr. Chair, I'll do more than that. I'd like to withdraw my comments. Thank you. That's very much appreciated. Chair, my colleague earlier mentioned the importance attached to hearing witnesses in our committee on the continuum in education. Of course, we're all MPs, politicians around the table, and we pursue politics. But to paint our organisations as victims who are working night and day, sweating blood to teach French to our Francophone young people, and those who want to learn French, I believe that has to be heard. The impact of this motion being submitted by Mr. Iacono, well, he knew the impact that that was going to have. And I believe that he is playing a very partisan-based game here. And unfortunately, the debate on the French language is descending into partisanship, and that really isn't a winning model for Francophones. So I'd like to take a chronological approach like my colleague did earlier, because I think he came out with some false statements. Now, Mr. Brok, on the 24th of October, 2024, turned to the Speaker and turned to the NDP Liberal government, and he talked about the tax burden criminality that's continually going up. Stop crime. Just some weeks after the Prime Minister arrived in power, GC strategy, there were two people working in a basement, started to get government contracts, just like handing out candy at Halloween, and got 20 million to do nothing when it came to the Arrive scam that was a complete failure. And if that's not corruption, what would be corruption? Are the Liberals going to claw back our money for us?
Iacono.
My colleague, Member Iacono, stated that Mr. Brok was speaking to Mr. Duclos, the Minister of Government Services and Procurement. He was actually addressing the Prime Minister. Mr. Fergus then gave the floor to Mr. Duclos. Mr. Duclos said, "Mr. Speaker, you could also..." He's speaking to the Speaker of the House, not to Mr. Brok. He's addressing Mr. Fergus. I'm going to say in French something my colleague has already heard many times in English. He knows full well that the Auditor General is independent, that the RCMP is independent as well, and that both those organizations do their work as they believe fit, and we are there to support them. Mr. Brok, and this is where the whole thing hinges on. Mr. Speaker, I put my question in English, but I'm moving away from the topic. He never accused or clearly asked the Honourable Minister Duclos to answer in French, in English rather. His comment wasn't judicious, not necessary, and unacceptable. I have said that, as have my colleagues. Liberal corruption is unceasing. The Auditor General is investigating contracts going up to 100 million awarded to GC Strategies, a two-person IT company that does no IT work. The verbatim transcript states several members saying, "Oh." The Speaker of the House calls the House to order. Mr. Fergus, after this whole thing on which the motion hinges, said after rising and speaking to members, "It's very important to point out that questions can be put in English or French, and that the answers can be given in English or French. I will ask the member to start again from the beginning." He's not asking the member to apologize. Later, and Mr. Boissonneau has had a point of order at 3:15, so it should be a point of order. Mr. Speaker, he says, I believe it's important to note that we saw a flagrant lack of respect in the House of Commons towards our ... Voices again. Mr. Fergus, the Speaker, stands and says, he tells all members this. And the chair has made a statement on this and made it during question period, not asking Mr. Bloch to rise. The Speaker has already made a statement on this during question period, so I assume the matter was settled at that point. Mr. Brock, and I'm not ascribing any intent to him, but he realized he'd made a mistake, rose humbly and said, "Mr. Speaker, point of order. My second question was originally in English. I was unable to hear the minister's response. Because of the noise in the House, the volume on my earpiece did not work properly, and this is why I pointed that out." And then he says, "Obviously, I acknowledge that all members have the right to ask questions and answer in both official languages." Mr. Chairman, the Speaker seemed to consider the matter closed, asked no one to apologize. Mr. Brock, according to my interpretation, did offer an apology. And then the member for Brantford-Brent said that when people speak, and I'm talking about the conversation between the member for Pickering-Uxbridge and a member for Lakeland, we cannot answer what's being said because there's so much noise when people speak without having the floor. And this is a very important point. Mr. Lightbound, the member for the riding beside mine, stood and said, "Point of order, the member for Bradford-Brant is trying to divert attention from what he actually said." But we've all understood what he was trying to do. He tried to imply that the member for Quebec City should not answer in French. He should apologize for that. That, Mr. Chairman, is my colleague's interpretation of the matter. It's not up to me to judge whether it is the right interpretation or not. My interpretation is different. The Speaker of the House, Mr. Fergus, answered Mr. Lightbound. The Speaker has heard enough. Mr. Chairman, in my view, it's clear that the Speaker of the House essentially applied the rules in the House of Commons. That is his role. And if he did not ask for an apology after the Liberal Party decided to ask for an apology, they asked for one, and the Speaker ruled that the matter had been dealt with and was now closed. If the Speaker uses his judgment to ask a parliamentarian to apologize and at other times does not request it, that is because he has decided there is no need for an apology. Let's look at January 30th, 2024. I put a question. Mr. Speaker, this government is once again peddling disinformation. The member for Gaspésie-les-Îles-de-la-Madeleine is misleading the House. She should deal with her own region. The Gaspé and the Magdalen Islands are in the midst of a dreadful housing crisis. I'm not saying it. It is the collective housing lead head in the region. What is the government doing to help people in the Magdalen Islands find a housing solution? Question mark. And 3 dots. The Speaker rose and said, "Sometimes I have difficulty hearing members who are far from the chair. I'm asking the member for Lac Saint-Jean to remain silent while questions are put and answers given." The Honourable Minister of Fisheries and Oceans has the floor. Ms. Le Boutillier said, "Mr. Speaker, as I said yesterday, I would ask my colleague across the way who is telling us to leave the islands that many of us have left the islands and are now all across Canada. These are people who are very much involved in their communities. If he had any spine, let him stand up and apologize to the people of the Magdalen Islands." So this member is asking me to apologize. What is the link with the motion? The chair asked. Answer, well, this is on apologies. I'm giving past examples of an apology being requested and the speaker making a ruling. There are instances in which the speaker has asked for an apology. I'm trying to see whether you're drawing a parallel with something that happened in a committee. Are you talking about a motion made before a different committee, moved before a different committee? That would involve Ms. Leboutillier? No, I'm giving examples of when the Speaker of the House has ruled. When the Speaker rises, members know, he said, that they cannot impugn the reputation of a member. What did Ms. Leboutillier do? She stood up and said, Mr. Speaker, I apologize. Basically, what you are doing is casting doubt upon, questioning the judgment of the Speaker of the House. They are in the majority. They've managed, in a way, because they've managed to get one of their own elected as a speaker. Now they are questioning the judgment, a ruling by their speaker, and insisting that a member of our party, Larry Brock, apologizes. That is quite odd. This should be raised in the House as a question of privilege. Mr. Godin, I'm just trying to understand. Mr. Brock doesn't want to apologize in the House. I don't see the relevance of what the Speaker does and doesn't do when an apology is made in the House. I understand what you're saying, Mr. Serré. I'm also trying to understand. I know that Mr. Godin is talking about something that is essentially in parallel to what is happening here. I'm not judging what you're saying, Mr. Godin. Please carry on. What I'm trying to say is that Ms. Leboutillier apologized, yes, because the Speaker asked her to, because the Speaker of the House recognized something had happened in the House that should not have happened. So Mr. Brock's statements were made in the House of Commons. Had the Speaker believed that Mr. Brock had done something he should apologize for, he would have requested an apology. There should be some consistency here. What I'm saying is that the Liberals are once again questioning or defying the judgment of the Speaker. We're seeing it in the House of Commons on the question of privilege. The Speaker has stated that documents need to be produced, and they are not producing them. Mr. Iacono, what's happening in the House of Commons at present has no bearing on the motion that I have moved here. So I would ask you to ensure that the member across the table speaks to the motion. I can see Mr. Godin's parallel, and it does have some bearing on this motion, even though it is not a debate on the central tenet of the motion. Mr. Chairman, we feel that Liberals aren't recognizing that Mr. Brock, after rising in the House, published later an apology in French and English. Those are two things he has done to recognize he was at fault. It was not in the House of Commons. Even though the Speaker didn't ask for an apology in the House of Commons, that's not good enough for them. If I look at the platform X, it is clear. I'll just find it. Thank you for your patience. Here is what it states. Thank you, Larry. This is what the minister answered to the apology on X, Mr. Brock's apology on X, formerly Twitter. And you know who wrote that at 4:43 p.m. on the same day? The Honourable Minister Jean-Yves Duclos. So if he thanks Larry Brock, just to make sure that's clear, this is on Mr. Brock's page. If the person who's directly affected by the apology thanks my colleague for his apology, which were made in both official languages, he's recognizing the right of every Canadian parliamentarian to speak English or French while engaged in the work of Parliament. Now, all members here have received yet more testimony of the Conservatives' good faith on official languages. Nobody's perfect. Nobody's perfect, Mr. Chairman. I can produce a whole list of what Liberals have done, showing they don't intend to protect bilingualism in Canada. We can talk about the Governor-General, but I'll stop there. I think people can draw their own conclusions. I do have a list here if it's needed. Mr. Chairman, you have received and the clerk distributed this morning 2 letters. 2 letters. For those listening, 1 official letter and an email. Well, 2 items of correspondence. We won't necessarily talk about Ms. Thomas, who apologized properly. I think what's more concerning for my colleagues here is Mr. Brock, the member for Brantford-Brent.
And I read this out. It's directed to Mr. Arsenault, Chair of the Standing Committee on Official Languages, House of Commons, Ottawa, and then the Postal Code. Mr. Arsenault, it has come to my attention that a Liberal motion concerning me is currently blocking the important work of this committee, and here I'd like to make a comment. It is very important work. It's based on my motion that was accepted around the table here by all political parties so that we'd carry out a study on the continuum of education from early learning to post-secondary. And we've already dealt with the post-secondary side, but that will be integrated into the report. So it's a very important work. And you and myself were at the Congress of the Federation of Francophone School Boards of Canada, if you remember the title correctly, FFC and something like that in French, in Charlottetown. That took place about a week and a half ago. We were both at that meeting, and people were very happy there to be able to participate in this study. And that's why we reserved 12 meetings for this study. Now, today, there's a will on the part of the government, we think, to play little political games around these apologies that have been made on 3 occasions. So I'll continue with the letter. This motion requests my formal apology, which I have already made for the remarks I made in the House on Thursday, October the 24th, 2024. The apologies I've already given on October 24th remain the same. I want to apologise to Minister Duclos and all my colleagues for my comments in question period today. Every member of Parliament has the right to speak in the official language of their choice, and my comment was inappropriate, and I am sorry. Please convey my apologies to the Minister and other members of the committee. So another sequence of apologies from my colleague. Chairman, I'll come back to a comment that's been made here, because in our discussions we referred to the OMP situation that actually held up 7, if not 8, committee meetings, because he had said that the witnesses were plein marde, they were shitty, and we had said that he should no longer be allowed to sit in this committee. And Mr. Drouin came back and said goodbye to us. and then new members were appointed, and now we've got Mr. Lightbound, who's replacing him. We're very happy to have him amongst us. But Mr. Lightbound, last week, when I listened to his comments on this famous Drouin saga, Mr. Lightbound said, and I'm going to cite what he said, to the extent that it's admissible because it's very similar to the one on which the committee has just voted. However, I still have some comments to make on what has just been mentioned. I really respect her, and she's certainly a voice of reason. Probably she's referring to Madame Gladue. And when she said that it's vindictive and petty-minded, I'd like to recall to her that even if both of us were not at the committee, that in the case of Mr. Drouin, it was talked about for a great deal for Mr. Gaudin after he apologised on many, many occasions. That's not true. He only apologised on one occasion here in the committee. But now to continue with the comments from my colleague, the Conservatives in fact wanted to roll him in the tar and throw feathers at him. I like that image there that has been raised by my colleague. But now, Chair, the apologies from my colleague on 3 separate occasions in the House, then on Twitter, /X, where he was thanked for his apology by Minister Duclos, and then the letter that's been submitted today. What else do they want? Do they want politicking around this, or do we want to work for the Official Languages Committee and start doing our work once again on the committee study? It's because I'm hearing murmurings on the other side. So the study on the continuum of education. So, Chair, I think that's important. It's important to draw this parallel, I think. Are we going to hang him? Are we going to send him out to be flagellated on the public square? Is that what the Liberals want? On 3 occasions, my colleague has presented his apologies in the form of his choice, but the Liberals aren't accepting the format of his apology. Sincerely, I think they're just digging in their heels, and I find it very unfortunate. Now, Chair. Now, I don't know whether I'm going to go in this direction. Go where you want, as long as it is still relevant to the motion. Always. You know that I am very attached to the procedures. Now, while you're looking at your notes, I'd just like to say to the committee that the last 2 minutes of the committee are going to be reserved for some comments wherever we're at in the debate. I'm going to take 2 minutes to address the committee myself at the end. Well, I'll take this opportunity to thank you for having shown respect towards our witnesses. You have taken the decision, and you informed us, the vice chairs, that the witnesses that were called for last Thursday, because you knew what was coming up, witnesses who were coming from British Columbia. I don't know where the witnesses were coming in from today, but thank you very much for having shown respect for witnesses. I think it's important to mention that. Now, Chair, I'd like to add something. We're claiming in this debate, that's what I've heard from the other side earlier, that Conservative MPs are not sensitive to the French issue and our Canadian-French identity. Now, you would be surprised, Chair, to see the number of Conservative MPs who speak French. Chair, I'll give you some advice for you and all of your friends in the Liberal Party. Tread carefully, because even if they don't speak French fluently, they can speak it pretty well in a discreet manner, and they actually understand it very well. That's their personal choice. We state that in the motion, and I'm going to reread that text. the motion from Mr. Iacono, where it says that the committee recognise that French is just as important. No, that's not what the line that wanted to call it. It says the committee remind all MPs of their right to speak in whichever of the two official languages. And when we refer to official languages, once again, I have to have a passing wink because, of course, it's obvious for the Liberal MPs and for Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, the two official languages are not necessarily English and French, are they? Because he's appointed a Governor-General who is bilingual but who does not speak French. So that raises a big flag for us. So, my colleagues, Chair, you'd be surprised, and I'm repeating myself here, they speak more French than you think. And that was my greatest discovery when I took up this portfolio of official languages. Yesterday, I met with Canadian Parents for French, and it was impressive to see the great interest of Canadians. They're really attached to the particular identity of Canada and the importance of maintaining bilingualism, and they really do want to learn French. It's not that there's a lack of clientele. It's more a lack of accessibility that's the real issue. And that's all to the honour of the Francophone who are waging this battle on a daily basis. And I understand my colleagues calling for apologies from my colleague, Mr. Brock. But my colleague, Mr. Brock, has proffered his apologies. And it's important to defend French. And I'll always be there to defend French. But we should not fall into another trap. And I'll take up that image of seeing Mr. Brock rolled in tar and covered in feathers. Now you remember, well, perhaps you didn't do that in Acadia. I saw that in Looky Luke with the Dalton's brothers. No, I didn't want to speak about that. I've already seen that in my youth, where people were doing all of that for their stag night. Unfortunately, there were some dramas that then occurred. But at one point in time, of course, we have to see reason here. We have to realise that I think this is getting a bit abusive to dig in their heels and continue to stick to this motion tooth and nail. There was another specific gesture that was offered by my colleague. Has he to come here on bowed knee and ask for some sort of dispensation? I can't quite remember what the religious term is. Is he looking for complete absolution, unconditional absolution? What was it again? He's looking for absolution, complete forgiveness. Well, I think it's very important for us to be able to move on. And I agree with Ms. Ashton. And once again, I have withdrawn my comments and I offer my sincere apologies. I don't mind apologising. When we do something which is unacceptable, then we owe it to ourselves to apologise. And that's what my colleague has done as well. My colleague on 3 occasions will say, OK, you're just repeating yourself here. But it is important to get that message across, because often people are not always listening carefully with an attentive ear. And that is why I believe this motion that's been moved is not necessarily acceptable. And I wonder, what's the political will behind this? Of course, they want to eke out some political gain from this. Now, we're not naive either. But at some point in time, we have to see reason. I've reached out, and if the Liberals start talking about a wasting of time, well, they're the ones who have moved this motion. They can decide to withdraw it. It's up to them. It's their choice. We have certain tools here. There are procedures that exist, and as parliamentarians, we use our tools to ensure that our rights are respected as parliamentarians in this case here. And I think it's important to make sure that each of the MP's rights is actually recognised. In the motion from our colleague where it says that the committee requests that the MP for Brantford Brant to apologise in the House. Chair, we're choosing now the environment where he has to proffer his apologies. But, Chair, our colleague has already apologised. No one can contradict that here. And the main person concerned, or the main actor in the saga, if you like, is in fact the MP for Public Services and Procurement of Canada, the Honourable Jean-Yves Duclos from Quebec City. I had the honour of representing a ride in Quebec City together with Mr. Duclos, Mr. Lightbound, Mr. Delatel and Mr. Paulus. Now, Chair, the Minister himself, the Honourable Jean-Yves Duclos, has said thank you. Merci. On the social media platform used by my colleague Larry Brock, who submitted his apology. Chair, I'll find it somewhere in my binder here. The apology from my colleague, my excellent colleague and friend mon ami Bernard Leroux, Généreux, said that he made his apology in the 2 official languages. So, Larry Brock.
And all my colleagues for my comments in question period today. Every member of Parliament has the right to speak in the official language of their choice. My comment was inappropriate and I'm sorry. En français, Monsieur le Président, je tiens à m'excuser.
In French, I would like to apologize to Minister Duclos and to all colleagues for my statements during question period today. Every member of Parliament has the right to express their views in the official language of their choice, and my comment was inappropriate. And the last 4 words, and I apologize. Who answered? When you say thank you, Larry, it's not Larry McGuire or Larry Robinson. It's on Larry Brock's page. Yeah, you know who Larry Robinson is. Right. Understand, Mr. Chairman? Please finish your sentence. Unless his Twitter page was hacked, it's Jean-Yves Duclos who wrote, thank you, Larry, merci, Larry, on Larry Brock's page. So the committee understands. You are reading the exchange on Twitter. I have set aside the last few minutes for myself. The witnesses were supposed to be the official languages commissioner as well as representatives from Saskatchewan and British Columbia. I will cancel them. We will adjourn in a few seconds. With the current debate, Mr. Gaudin, you still have the floor. Here's the order I have. Mr. Gaudin, Mr. Serré, Ms. Gladue, I haven't forgotten you, Mr. Beaulieu, Mr. Généreux, and Mr. Iacono. And Mr. Dalton, well, you can raise your hand when we're back. This is what I've written down. Mr. Gaudin still has the floor. Mr. Serré, Gladue, Beaulieu, Généreux, Iacono. And the meeting is now adjourned.